So, if you're listening to this right now, there is a very good chance that you are either, agonizing over prep for an upcoming job interview, or maybe you're just staring at a rejection email.
Yeah, completely baffled, just trying to dissect exactly what went wrong in that room.
Right, exactly. And today's deep dive is fundamentally designed to permanently alter how you approach both of those scenarios. I'm your host, and I'm sitting down with our resident expert today to plunge into something really special.
We're getting into episode 2 of the Project Management Interview Series. That's from the Critical Path YouTube channel.
Yeah, and the focus of this specific material is, well, it's a total deconstruction of what hiring managers are actually afraid of when you sit down across from them.
Which is such a wild concept for most people to even consider it.
It really is. The mission here is to stop you from self-sabotaging, basically. We want to equip you with this psychological advantage that most candidates don't even know exists.
Because it's a critical layer of strategy that just gets completely ignored. I mean, people spend weeks, literally weeks, memorizing project frameworks, and they completely forget to analyze the human being on the other side of the desk.
Right. Which actually brings me to a metaphor that I think perfectly captures how we usually mess this up.
Oh, the stage play analogy.
Yes. Think about a stage play. The house lights go down, the heavy velvet curtain goes up, and the spotlight hits the lead actor, and for the next 2 hours, the entire universe shrinks down to just them.
Just the actor and the light.
Exactly. The actor is hyper-focused on their marks, their projection, the cadence of their lines, and the audience. The audience is just this dark, silent void sitting out there in the seats, passively judging the performance.
Yeah, and honestly, that stage play dynamic is precisely how we're conditioned to treat the job interview.
It totally is. We treat ourselves like the actor in the spotlight, and the person across the table is just, the void.
Right, you feel all this immense pressure to output a flawless performance. And you just assume the person across the table feels absolutely nothing but judgmental curiosity.
Like they're just holding a clipboard and grading you.
Exactly. It's a completely one-way street in the candidate's mind.
So today, we are shattering that perspective. But before we get to the core of episode 2, we really have to ground this in the massive realization that the Critical Path dropped in episode 1 of their series.
Oh, the baseline truth.
Yeah, the idea that being a genuinely fantastic project manager and being fantastic at interviewing for a project manager job are two entirely different, isolated skills.
And that is a realization that, frankly, it frustrates a lot of seasoned professionals.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Well, the natural logical assumption is that a strong track record speaks for itself, right? You look at your resume and you think, I have delivered complex, multi-million-dollar global rollouts. I've recovered failing portfolios.
Right, the proof is on the paper.
Exactly. You think, obviously, any competent hiring manager is going to immediately recognize my value.
And then they walk into the interview room, lean entirely on that operational track record, and then they walk out totally confused when they get that generic, we went with another candidate email 3 days later.
Because they flexed the operational skill, but completely neglected the interview skill.
Which is why the core theme of this specific source material today is so vital. We are taking that inward-facing spotlight perspective and flipping the table entirely.
We have to stop worrying about how your hands are moving or whether your voice sounded slightly nervous.
Or if you use the perfect buzzword in the third sentence of your answer.
Right. We are going to step directly into the mind of the person sitting across from you.
So let's actually put ourselves in the room. Let's say you've done the heavy lifting to get there. You optimized the CV. It made it past the initial algorithmic screening.
You survived that usually somewhat stilted, awkward screening call with the external recruiter.
Oh man, those are always so awkward. But yeah, you survived that. Now you are sitting in the actual room, or maybe you're staring into the camera lens on a video call with the actual hiring manager.
And the pressure is just suffocating.
Suffocating. Candidates naturally hyper-focus inward. The internal monologue is just deafening, right? Like, am I talking too fast? Did I totally botch the ending of that story? Do I look desperate?
Which is a completely biological reaction, by the way.
Wait, really? Biological?
Oh, absolutely. Your nervous system literally perceives a threat to your livelihood, which triggers a mild fight or flight response. Your focus naturally narrows to your own immediate survival.
That makes so much sense.
But the cost of surrendering to that inward focus is devastating. When you are trapped in the echo chamber of your own head, you miss the reality of the human being looking back at you.
You completely miss their context.
Yes. You miss the pressure they are under, and most importantly, their emotional state.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about their emotional state, but honestly, if I'm sitting in that chair, I'm looking at someone who holds the keys to my mortgage.
Right. They have the power.
They have the power to offer me a six-figure salary or send me back to the job boards. I mean, I always visualize it like a courtroom.
The courtroom analogy.
Yeah. I'm the defendant trying to prove my innocence, and the hiring manager is the judge sitting high up on the bench, slamming a gavel, actively trying to poke holes in my story and catch me in a lie. How can they possibly be the ones sweating?
Well, because that courtroom analogy, while incredibly common, is completely disconnected from corporate reality. The hiring manager isn't a judge.
They aren't.
Not at all. They aren't trying to catch you out. They aren't sitting there hoping you stumble so they can cross you off a list with a red pen. The defining emotion of the hiring manager in that moment is terror.
Error.
They are terrified.
The person holding the job offer is terrified. Okay, let's unpack this. Because visually, they usually look remarkably calm. They've got their notebook, their branded pen, their printed list of questions. They project total control.
Oh, they are projecting control to mask the sheer impossibility of the task they are being asked to perform.
The impossibility.
Yeah. The source material emphasizes the constraints of the standard 50-minute interview window. Let's do the math on that window. You have 50 minutes on a calendar, right?
Okay.
The first 5 minutes are chewed up by awkward small talk about the weather.
Or someone struggling to share their screen on Zoom.
Exactly. And the last 5 minutes are reserved for you to ask them questions. That leaves 40 minutes of actual evaluation.
40 minutes?
40 minutes to assess a complete stranger, someone they have never met, never worked alongside, and never seen under pressure. In that brief window, they have to make a decision that will irrevocably lock in their team's dynamic, dictate their own personal stress levels, and consume a massive chunk of their departmental budget for a minimum of the next 2 years.
When you lay out the math like that, making a 2-year high-stakes commitment based on a 40-minute conversation is absurd.
It's completely absurd.
I mean, you wouldn't sign a lease on an apartment after a 40-minute walkthrough without checking the plumbing, let alone tie your professional fate and your team's sanity to a stranger.
It is an inherently flawed, impossible system. And the experienced hiring managers, the ones who have been around the block, they know it's impossible because they have already been burned by it.
They've made bad hires before.
Anyone who has managed people for more than a few years has made the wrong call. They've sat across from a candidate who was incredibly charismatic, who nailed every single behavioral question, whose resume was flawless, and who turned out to be an absolute disaster the second they actually started the job.
So they carry the psychological scars of those bad hires into the room with you.
Precisely. They carry that baggage.
So they aren't looking at me thinking, how can I trick this candidate? They're looking at me thinking, how do I make absolutely sure this person isn't going to be the next mistake that ruins my life?
Exactly. They are desperately trying to mitigate risk.
Which brings us to a massive pivotal concept in the material. If they are this terrified of making a bad hire, we really need to understand the actual mechanics of the fallout.
The true costs.
Because from the candidate side of the table, failing an interview just means you don't get the job. It's a bad afternoon.
You move on to the next application.
Right. But the source material details what they call the anatomy of a manager's nightmare. It breaks down the catastrophic fallout of a bad hire into 3 distinct categories of pain.
And understanding these 3 costs is what actually allows you to empathize with the person judging you. It's so important. Let's look at the financial burn first. The pure dollars and cents.
Yeah, let's start there.
Because hiring is astronomically expensive before the person even sits at their desk.
Right, you've got the recruiter fees, which, if they are using an external agency, can be 20 or 25% of the first year's base salary.
Which is massive.
Yeah.
Then factor in the internal costs. The hours the HR department spent screening, the hours the hiring manager spent interviewing a dozen people instead of doing their actual job.
It adds up fast.
It does. But the true financial hemorrhage really begins once the bad hire starts working. You are paying a full, often premium salary during a prolonged period of active underperformance.
Right, because corporate reality dictates you can't just fire someone on week 3 because you have a bad feeling about them.
Exactly. It usually takes a solid 3 to 6 months for a bad project manager to fully reveal the depths of their incompetence. And during those months, they're collecting full pay.
And then what happens?
Well, once the manager finally decides this isn't working, they have to initiate formal HR procedures, performance improvement plans, documentation, warnings. That takes another 2 to 3 months.
Wow, dragging it out even further.
Yep. Then, after paying severance, the manager has to start the entire expensive recruiting process all over again. A single bad hire can easily represent hundreds of thousands of dollars of burned capital.
The financial cost is staggering. But honestly, that's just the company's money. I mean, the manager isn't paying that out of their own checking account.
Right, it's corporate money.
What they do feel in their bones every single day is the second category, the operational cost.
Oh, this is a painful one.
Yeah, because a bad PM isn't just a vacant seat. They don't just sit quietly and fail to deliver. They actively create chaos.
They manufacture new work for everyone around them. This is the daily grinding reality for the hiring manager. I mean, think about it. When you secure headcount to hire a project manager, the entire goal is to take things off your plate.
You need someone to own a portfolio so you can breathe.
Exactly. But a bad hire reverses that dynamic entirely.
So instead of delegating, the manager essentially becomes the highly paid janitor of the new hire's messes. Let's walk through the mechanics of how that actually happens, because it's not just, oh, they missed a deadline.
No, it's the ripple effect.
Right.
Think about a scenario where a bad PM fails to properly document a massive piece of scope creep from a client. They just nod along in a meeting, and they don't update the project charter or the budget.
Okay, classic mistake.
A month later, the engineering team refuses to build the feature because it's not in the sprint plan. The client is furious because they thought it was agreed upon.
Oh, no.
Suddenly, at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, the issue escalates directly past the PM and lands right on the hiring manager's desk.
So instead of leaving early for their kid's soccer game, the hiring manager is now locked in a tense, defensive Zoom call with an angry client, apologizing and giving away free, billable hours just to save the relationship.
Exactly. All because their new hire didn't send a simple follow-up email.
That is brutal.
And that is just one incident. The manager is suddenly forced into this microscopic level of hand-holding. They're staying late to re-baseline the project schedules that the new hire broke.
They're probably quietly proofreading the new hire's status reports before they go to the executive team, right? Just so they don't look foolish.
Exactly. They are spending hours doing damage control with stakeholders who have been alienated by the new hire's poor communication style. The manager is absorbing all of this granular execution work on top of the strategic responsibilities they already had.
So their personal quality of life absolutely pinks. They hired someone to get their weekends back, and instead, they are working longer hours than ever, entirely consumed by cleaning up someone else's wreckage.
Which naturally bleeds right into the third and perhaps most psychologically damaging consequence.
The reputational cost.
The reputational cost. Because it's not just the lost weekends. It's how this failure is perceived by the rest of the organization.
Right, because it's not happening in a vacuum. Everyone in the office knows exactly who hired this person.
In a corporate hierarchy, a manager's competence is judged primarily by the quality of the team they build. You are strictly and ultimately accountable for the talent you bring through the door.
So if you bring in a walking disaster, it is a glaring public indictment of your own professional judgment.
The water cooler talk is brutal. The engineering leads are complaining to their bosses about the useless new PM. The marketing team is openly mocking the project delays.
And more critically, the hiring manager's own boss, the director or the VP, is watching this unfold.
They are watching the hiring manager struggle to contain the chaos. And that VP starts doing their own mental math.
Uh-oh.
They start thinking, if this manager can't even evaluate and hire a mid-level PM correctly, how can I possibly trust them to lead the new strategic portfolio next year? How can I promote them?
Wow.
A bad hire severely damages the manager's political capital and essentially halts their upward mobility.
So let's pull this all back to the candidate sitting in the chair, sweating about whether they use the right buzzwords. You have the massive financial burn. You have the operational nightmare of becoming a full-time babysitter. And you have the public reputational damage that derails careers.
It's a lot.
By the time you sit down and get ready to answer, tell me about yourself, the hiring manager isn't plotting to aggressively interrogate you. They are desperately, frantically trying to figure out if handing you an offer letter is going to ruin their life for the next year.
That is the ultimate reframe. Recognizing that fear is the foundational step. But simply knowing they are scared is just the diagnosis. The real value of the source material comes in the cure.
Okay, so what is the cure? How does a candidate fundamentally alter their interview behavior based on this psychological reality?
Because the standard playbook that we all follow intuitively is built on a completely different objective. We walk into that room, and our single overriding goal is to impress the manager.
We want to dazzle them.
We want to put on such an incredible show that they walk out and tell HR, "Stop the search, we found a superstar."
And society conditions us to believe that is the correct approach.
Yeah.
Put your best foot forward. Show them how amazing you are.
But the source material meticulously deconstructs why the goal of dazzling is actually a trap.
A trap.
Yes. When your primary objective is to impress, your entire communication style shifts. You default to talking exclusively about your absolute biggest achievements.
Right.
You highlight the most massive budgets you've ever managed, the largest global teams, the highest stakes crises you've averted.
Let me push back on that, though, because if I just managed a $50 million global software rollout across 3 continents, shouldn't I talk about that? Doesn't a massive, complex success unequivocally prove my competence?
It proves you are highly competent in that specific past environment, with that specific team and that specific organizational structure. It does not automatically guarantee you are the correct solution to the hiring manager's current, highly specific problem. The issue isn't that talking about massive scale is wrong. The issue is that it is often incomplete and tone-deaf to the room. The manager is sitting there terrified, trying to overlay your past performance onto their future reality. If you just launch into a monologue about your massive scale, you aren't addressing their context.
It reminds me of a homeowner with a massive, immediate problem. Imagine a pipe bursts in my basement.
Okay.
There is water rapidly rising, threatening the electrical panel. I am in a state of sheer panic. I call a plumber. The plumber arrives, stands at the top of the stairs looking down at the flood, and instead of grabbing a wrench, they pull out an iPad.
Oh, no.
They start showing me a PowerPoint presentation about how they just engineered the state-of-the-art water reclamation system for a new 90-story skyscraper downtown.
That's a phenomenal analogy.
It's like, yes, that is objectively impressive. You are clearly a very talented engineer. But it doesn't tell me if you know how to wade into my dirty basement, find the shutoff valve, and solder this specific broken copper pipe right now without overcharging me or making the flood worse.
Right.
In fact, hearing about the 90-story skyscraper might actually increase my anxiety. I might start thinking, this person is too strategic for my tactical problem. They are going to get bored. Or they're going to try to redesign my whole house instead of just fixing the leak.
The hiring manager has a very specific, very stressful, leaky pipe in their department. And if you are just standing there shouting about your past skyscrapers, you are completely ignoring their underlying fear. You are answering the silent question screaming in their head, which is, can you fix my exact problem without creating new ones?
So if the objective isn't to dazzle them with skyscrapers, what is the new objective?
The objective is to make the hiring decision feel safe. You don't need to be the most dazzling, entertaining, or superhuman candidate they speak to all week. You need to be the safest bet.
Safe. I'll be honest. If you tell a driven, ambitious professional that their goal is to be safe, they are going to recoil.
Yeah, they hate that word.
It sounds boring. It sounds like aiming for mediocrity.
It sounds boring until you understand the context of the terror we just discussed. When a manager's career and quality of life are on the line, safe is the most intoxicating, powerful trait a candidate can possess.
Because it lowers the stakes for them.
Exactly. Safe doesn't mean average. Safe means proving, with surgical precision, that you understand their exact pain points. It means demonstrating that bringing you onto the team actively reduces their operational risk rather than multiplying it.
The energetic shift in the room when a candidate pivots from dazzling to safe is palpable. I mean, the candidate trying to dazzle is vibrating with this anxious, performative energy.
They are leaning forward, speaking too quickly, forcing their rehearsed stories into every answer, regardless of the actual question.
They are an actor demanding applause.
Whereas a candidate aiming for safe projects a profound, grounded calmness. They take off the performer's mask, they sit back, they listen critically to the phrasing of the manager's questions.
They aren't just waiting for their turn to speak.
No, they don't rush to fill silences with buzzwords. They behave like a diagnosing professional, sitting alongside a peer, trying to map out a shared business problem.
But to stop performing and start diagnosing, you have to actually know what the problem is. Which brings us to a harsh truth embedded in this deep dive. The genesis of the open role itself.
Why does the role even exist?
Exactly. Why are you sitting in that chair? Because companies do not hire project managers for fun.
They absolutely do not. Headcount is incredibly difficult to get approved in modern corporate environments. It requires layers of justification, budget reviews, and executive sign-off. A hiring manager doesn't wake up on a Tuesday and think, you know what would be nice, having another PM around the office to chat with?
They hire because they are in pain. The very existence of an open job requisition is proof of organizational trauma.
We need to define what that pain actually looks like on the ground. It usually means the department's workload has surged past the breaking point. The executive team has just dumped 3 new massive compliance projects onto the roadmap.
And the existing PMs are probably stretched so thin they are threatening to quit.
Yes. Deadlines that used to be manageable are slipping. Angry emails from stakeholders are piling up in the manager's inbox.
The manager is feeling the heat from above and the friction from below. They didn't need this position filled today. They needed it filled 4 months ago before the fire started.
The pain is urgent, visceral, and exhausting.
And understanding the depth of that pain offers a massive psychological release valve for the candidate. Because most of us harbor a deeply toxic misconception about the interview process.
Oh, absolutely.
We walk into the lobby feeling like we are starting from absolutely zero. We feel like intruders who have to aggressively justify our right to even be in the building.
We feel like we are clawing our way up a vertical cliff face, trying to manufacture interest out of thin air.
That feeling of starting from zero is the source of so much interview anxiety. You feel like the manager is sitting there with their arms crossed, staring at you, thinking, "Impress me, peasant. Prove you deserve to breathe my air."
But that is a complete fabrication of our own insecurities.
Yeah.
You do not start from zero. The invitation to interview is definitive, empirical proof of initial attraction. Your resume already did the heavy lifting.
That is a crucial distinction. The CV got you the room.
The manager looked at a digital pile of 200 resumes. They filtered out the noise. They looked at your specific timeline, your specific industry experience, the software tools you listed, and they had a very specific thought.
What were they thinking?
This person right here, might actually be the cure to the pain I am in.
So they aren't looking for a reason to reject you. They are actively, almost desperately, rooting for you to succeed.
They want you to win the interview. Think about the agonizing friction of the hiring process for them. If you walk in and prove you are the right fit, their painful search is over. The problem vanishes.
Right.
They can go to HR and close the requisition. They can go to their overloaded team and say, help is arriving in 2 weeks. They can finally log off at 5 p.m. on a Friday. They are literally praying that you are the answer to their prayers.
Which means your job as a candidate changes entirely. You don't have to build a case for your existence from the ground up. Your job is simply to amplify the pre-existing attraction.
The ember is already glowing.
You just have to gently, methodically fan it into a flame. You just have to confirm the hopeful suspicion they already had when they read your resume.
The material calls this the amplifier effect. It shifts your posture entirely. You realize you are walking into a warm room, not a hostile one.
But, and there is always a massive but in these situations, how exactly do you execute that amplification? How do you prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are the specific cure to their specific pain?
Right, because it's not enough to just say it.
Exactly. It is obviously not enough to just walk in, sit down, and confidently state, I am here to heal your organizational trauma. You have to demonstrate it. And according to the source material, demonstrating it requires a very specific, almost forensic level of pre-interview preparation.
This is where the theoretical psychology transitions into rigorous, actionable strategy. How do we engineer this feeling of safety before you ever put on interview clothes?
Right.
It begins with the most ubiquitous yet consistently misused tool in the entire process: the job description.
The job description. The document that 99% of candidates quickly skim for keywords, ensure they meet the minimum years of experience, and then immediately forget about the second they hit the apply button.
Exactly. Candidates treat the job description like a generic HR checklist. Must have 5 years of experience. Must know Jira. Must have Agile certification. They mentally check the boxes and move on.
And what does the source material say about that?
It argues that this is the greatest wasted opportunity in interview prep. You have to undergo a paradigm shift in how you read that document. You must treat the job description as a literal, highly specific map of the hiring manager's anxiety.
A map of anxiety. That is such a compelling frame. Walk me through the mechanics of decoding this map. If I have a typical corporate PM job description in front of me, what am I actually doing?
You print it out. You read it agonizingly slowly, line by line. And for every single bullet point, you refuse to accept it at face value. You force yourself to ask the underlying psychological question.
Which is?
Why did the hiring manager specifically fight with HR to include this exact phrase? What specific historical pain caused them to write this requirement? What are they terrified of lacking?
Okay, we need to spend serious time on this because this is the absolute core of the strategy. Let's invent some hypothetical scenarios based on common PM job description bullet points and deconstruct them.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's take a classic one. Must possess experience leading agile transformations in established enterprise environments.
A standard candidate reads that and thinks, great, I have a Scrum Master certification. I know how to run stand-ups and manage a backlog. I'll just talk about my certification.
How does the candidate using the map of anxiety read it? What is the hidden fear?
The candidate decoding the map looks at agile transformation in established enterprise and sees a massive red flag indicating profound internal friction.
Internal friction.
The hidden fear is cultural resistance. The hiring manager didn't write that because they love the theory of agile. They wrote that because their current engineering leads are veteran, stubborn developers who've been using waterfall methodology for 15 years and actively despise the idea of 2-week sprints.
The manager is exhausted from fighting with a lead architect who refuses to update their tickets.
Precisely. The manager is terrified of hiring a textbook PM who's just going to walk in, quote, the Scrum Guide, alienate the entire engineering department, and cause a mutiny. They need a diplomat, not a dictator.
So when you get the tell me about a time you handled a difficult project question, you don't just talk about running a good sprint. You specifically tailor your answer to the hidden fear. You say, in my last role, we transitioned a legacy team to Agile. The biggest challenge wasn't the software. It was the emotional resistance of the senior developers. I didn't force the framework on them. I sat down with the lead architect, listened to why he hated daily stand-ups, and we compromised on a process that worked for his workflow while still giving me the visibility I needed.
Yes, you just proved you were safe. You proved you can handle the emotional reality of their specific mess.
Let's do another one. How about demonstrated ability to aggressively manage third-party vendors and enforce tight SLAs.
Aggressively manage vendors. The standard read is, I've worked with external agencies before, I know how to review an invoice.
But the map of anxiety reveals a much darker story. The word aggressively is a massive tell.
It's a strong word.
Very strong. The hiring manager is currently being held hostage by a third-party vendor. A critical agency is consistently blowing past their service level agreements, delivering subpar work, and causing the internal project to constantly slip. And the manager's current team is probably too passive. They are just accepting the delays and apologizing to the executives.
Yes. The manager is terrified of hiring another passive order taker who will just forward the vendor's excuses.
Yeah.
They're desperate for an enforcer, someone who isn't afraid to get on a call, hold the vendor's feet to the fire, threaten breach of contract, and claw back project control.
So your preparation centers entirely around a story where you successfully audited a failing vendor, escalated the issue, and brought a derailed timeline back on track through sheer accountability. You speak directly to the fear of being taken advantage of.
Let's look at a third example, one related to soft skills. Exceptional executive-level communication and presentation skills required.
I see this on almost every senior PM role. The generic response is, I'm comfortable speaking in front of people. I can make a nice PowerPoint deck.
But what is the specific fear driving that requirement? It's the fear of public embarrassment by association. Think about it. The hiring manager has to put this new PM in front of the project steering committee, which includes the VP of Finance and the Chief Operating Officer. The manager is terrified of hiring someone who gets into that high-stakes room, gets nervous, rambles, gets defensive when challenged on a budget variance, and ultimately makes the hiring manager look incredibly incompetent for hiring them.
The manager is literally thinking, if I put you in front of my boss, are you going to destroy my reputation?
Precisely. So to alleviate that fear, your communication style in the interview itself becomes the proof. You don't just tell a story about presenting to executives. You answer their interview questions with executive-level precision.
You show them. You don't just tell them.
Right. You use the bottom line up front, communication style. You are concise, you don't ramble, and you remain utterly composed when they push back on a detail. You embody the safety they need.
Let's do one more because this is fascinating and so practical. How about this one? Must be highly comfortable navigating extreme ambiguity and driving projects with minimal initial direction.
This is a classic indicator of a chaotic, fast-growth environment Or maybe a company undergoing massive restructuring. The standard candidate thinks, I'm flexible. I can go with the flow.
But the map of anxiety tells us something else entirely.
It tells us the manager is drowning and has absolutely zero time to handhold. They are terrified of hiring the order taker PM.
The order taker.
The kind of PM who sits at their desk waiting for a perfectly defined project charter, assigned budget, and explicit daily instructions before they do any work. While the order taker waits for perfection, the project burns down.
The manager needs someone who can walk into a burning room, figure out where the water is, and start putting out the fire without asking for permission.
Exactly. So your stories must focus on moments where you stepped into a void of leadership, created structure out of chaos, drafted the initial plan yourself, and presented it to stakeholders for alignment, rather than waiting to be told what to do.
Decoding the job description like this is incredibly powerful. But the source material pushes the preparation even further, doesn't it?
It does.
Because the job description is just the internal view of the anxiety. It's what HR allowed them to publish, but a company does not exist in a vacuum. What about the external pressures driving the fear?
This is the second layer of the forensic homework. You have to research what the material refers to as the company's corporate storms.
Corporate storms.
A hiring manager isn't just backfilling a desk to maintain the status quo. They are invariably arming up for a specific incoming event.
What exactly constitutes a corporate storm in this context? Where is the candidate looking for this information?
You need to be aggressively searching recent press releases, reading industry news, and if it's a public company, listening to the most recent quarterly earnings call or reading the transcript. You're looking for major tectonic shifts.
Like what?
Have they just announced a massive merger with a competitor? Are they launching a brand new flagship product line next quarter? Are they expanding operations into the European market? Have they just undergone a brutal internal restructuring and laid off 20% of their workforce?
Because any one of those events signals a massive incoming tsunami of project complexity.
Exactly. Let's take the merger scenario. If the company just announced they acquired a rival firm, the hiring manager's anxiety map just exploded. They're staring down the barrel of integrating two completely different, likely incompatible IT infrastructures, merging two different corporate cultures, and dealing with duplicated software licenses, all while trying not to disrupt ongoing client work.
So if you walk into that room having done that external research, you have the opportunity to execute the ultimate paradigm shift. Instead of just passively waiting for them to ask you about your strengths and weaknesses, you proactively weave the storm into the conversation.
You seize the narrative.
Imagine the impact of saying, I've been tracking the recent announcement about the acquisition of Company X. In my experience with post-merger integrations, the biggest silent killer of timelines isn't the technology. It's the cultural clash between the engineering teams over which legacy systems to keep. When I managed a similar integration 3 years ago, here is exactly how I built a governance structure to mitigate that specific risk.
When you drop an insight like that, the effect on the hiring manager is profound and instantaneous.
I bet.
The dynamic of the room shatters. You permanently transcend the label of candidate.
Yeah.
You are no longer someone begging for a job, trying to prove your worth. You become a peer. You become a professional who already gets it. You are two experts discussing a shared industry problem.
You're physically stepping around to their side of the table. You are looking at the looming storm with them instead of them looking at you as another potential problem to solve.
And this brings us to the compounding physical effect of this specific type of preparation. When you prove, through decoding the internal job description and researching the external corporate storms, that you understand their problem deeply.
Right.
When you show that you see the fire coming and you already have the hose, the manager's fear doesn't just intellectually dissipate, it physically shrinks.
You can actually see the biological shift happen in the room, can't you?
You absolutely can. It is a noticeable physiological change. The tension leaves their posture. Their shoulders literally drop an inch. Their breathing slows down and deepens. They might lean back in their chair, uncross their arms, or literally set their pen down on the notebook because they stop feeling the need to scrutinize every word you say. They physically and mentally relax.
And that relaxation is the holy grail. That completely transforms the entire dynamic of the interaction. This is how an interview evolves from a rigid, terrifying, adversarial interrogation where they are firing trap questions and you are sweating out rehearsed answers into a relaxed, flowing, professional conversation.
It just becomes two peers sitting in a room, having a coffee, trying to figure out if they can work together to solve a complex problem.
And the most empowering takeaway for anyone listening to this deep dive is that this transformation isn't magic. It isn't based on being incredibly extroverted or having overflowing natural charisma. You don't need to be a showman.
Not at all.
You create this dynamic deliberately, methodically, and predictably through the sheer force of your preparation. You engineer the safety they are so desperate for.
It is brilliant. And it completely demystifies the anxiety of the process.
So let's tie this massive psychological deep dive all together and connect it back to the structural foundation we discussed at the beginning. In the first episode of the Critical Path series, they introduced this core framework of the 5-question domains. The idea that every single PM interview question inevitably falls into one of 5 distinct categories.
Right. But it is absolutely crucial to understand the hierarchy of these concepts. Everything we have unpacked today, understanding the manager's crippling fear, reading their operational pain through the map of anxiety in the job description, researching the external corporate storms, and positioning your energy as the safe solution. This isn't just another neat little interview tactic to add to your list.
No, it's bigger than that.
This is the foundational mindset layer. This is the operating system that makes all other frameworks actually function.
It's the engine that powers the car. You can memorize the STAR method: situation, task, action, result until you are blue in the face. You can structure your answers perfectly. But if you have the best STAR method answer in the world and it's aimed at the wrong target,
aimed at dazzling them with a skyscraper instead of fixing their leaky pipe.
Exactly. It is completely useless. This mindset ensures you are always constantly aiming every framework and every story at the ultimate target, reducing the hiring manager's fear.
If you don't have this empathetic mindset established first, the frameworks are just empty corporate jargon.
Now, as we begin to wrap up this intensive session, the source material provided a very compelling, almost intimidating tease for their next installment, Episode 3. And based on what we've uncovered today, I highly recommend our listeners do not miss it.
Yes, the upcoming focus shifts gears dramatically. We are moving from the psychological reality of the interview room into the uncomfortable, cold, financial reality.
The money side of things.
Specifically, the source material is going to break down exactly how to calculate what every single answer you give is worth in exact dollar terms, projecting your value over a 5-year period.
Which sounds intense, but necessary.
It is the concept that forces you to realize preparation is not just a nice to have. It is an absolute urgent financial imperative. When you realize the literal dollar value of a highly targeted fear-reducing answer versus a generic mediocre one, it fundamentally changes the ROI of your preparation time. You will never look at a Sunday afternoon spent researching a company the same way again.
Consider that a fair warning. Do not skip that next piece of the puzzle. Now, directly passing on a message from the source material. A quick call to action. If you are listening to this deep dive and this dissection of the manager's fear has changed how you view the interview room, share this audio.
Pass along.
Share it with any project manager you know who is currently grinding through the job hunt or has an upcoming interview. It might be the exact psychological paradigm shift they need to stop self-sabotaging and finally land the offer.
Additionally, as Asaf mentioned, for those who recognize they need the complete end-to-end system, every framework, every strategy, the detailed breakdown of those 5-question domains, and all the specific example answers covered across the entirety of their series, the creators have compiled a single PDF guide.
A very handy resource.
It is designed to be highly actionable, zero fluff, meant to be consumed the night before or the morning of your interview to lock in the mindset. It is available via the link in their description for a very accessible $9.99 as an instant download.
It's essentially the ultimate cheat sheet for calibrating your mindset before you walk into the building.
Furthermore, if you are finding yourself in a highly complex situation, maybe you are transitioning industries or dealing with a massive gap in your resume and you want to work through your specific scenario with an expert, they offer one-on-one coaching sessions.
And the best part is the first few are free, right?
Yes. In fact, the first 4 sessions are completely free, and that link is also available in their description. It's an incredible, risk-free resource if you're feeling stuck in your preparation.
Absolutely take advantage of that. The final sign-off from the source material, which I think is just the perfect distillation of everything we've talked about today, is a very simple, direct command. Do not wing it.
Never wing it. The financial and emotional stakes are simply too high for both you and the person sitting across from you.
So, as we fade out today, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you prepare for your next conversation. We started this deep dive by talking about the spotlight, the pressure on the actor, and the perceived dark, judgmental void of the audience.
Right, the stage play.
But what if the most powerful, undeniable asset you bring into your next interview room isn't your flawless, polished resume? What if it isn't your massive project scale, your prestigious certifications, or your perfectly rehearsed STAR method answers?
What if your most powerful asset is simply your capacity for radical empathy toward the terrified person judging you?
If you can step out of the blinding spotlight, walk out into the dark, sit down next to them and say, "I see the storm coming too, let's fix this together," everything changes.